Navy Pier draws almost 9 million visitors a year, which makes it one of the most visited attractions in the entire United States. It also has a reputation among people who actually know Chicago as one of the most disappointing places in the city, a place locals avoid, tourists feel vaguely let down by, and that somehow manages to be crowded and underwhelming simultaneously. Here's the full story of Chicago's Navy Pier and why tourists aren't coming back, what Navy Pier actually is, and what it was. Before getting into what went wrong, it's worth establishing what Navy Pier is because its history has layers that most visitors and most critics, making the easy tourist trap argument, don't know about. The pier was constructed beginning in 1916 and opened in July 1916 as the Municipal Pier of Chicago, a 3,000-foot-long structure extending into Lake Michigan that was designed from the start to serve multiple functions simultaneously. At its eastern end, it was a commercial shipping and freight terminal with rail access. Closer to shore, it was a passenger excursion terminal, a public recreational space, and an event venue. The design by Charles Sumner Frost was ambitious, a structure that acknowledged Chicago's industrial waterfront identity while creating a public amenity that would give the city's residents direct access to the lake. The setting, 3,000 feet of pier extending into Lake Michigan, with the city skyline behind it, was and remains genuinely extraordinary. During World War I, the pier was turned over to naval training use, which is how it acquired the name Navy Pier rather than its original Municipal Pier designation. During World War II, it again served as a training facility. From 1946 through 1965, the University of Illinois ran an extension campus on the pier, the Chicago Undergraduate Division, providing college access to returning veterans and Chicago residents who couldn't reach the university's downstate Champaign-Urbana campus. At its peak, this campus enrolled over 6,000 students annually. When the university finally opened its permanent Chicago Circle campus in 1965 and moved the students there, Navy Pier lost its most consistent and purposeful use. The 1970s were bad years for the pier. The commercial shipping function had wound down. The university was gone. Various proposals for redevelopment circulated and stalled. The structure sat, partially vacant and periodically used for industrial storage. Its Hisao Bashoa storage Salwehast, a declining asset on one of the most spectacular waterfront sites in the United States. The Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority was created by the Illinois General Assembly in 1989 to take over management of both Navy Pier and McCormick Place, Chicago's major convention center, and to develop a comprehensive plan for the pier's future. After years of planning and significant public investment in the structure's rehabilitation, Navy Pier reopened in July 1995 as a public entertainment destination. The 1995 reopening was a genuine success by any standard. The pier had been transformed, a 148-foot Ferris wheel installed, a Crystal Garden glass-enclosed botanical space, restaurants, retail shops, the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, the Chicago Children's Museum, a festival hall events complex, and a public promenade. The twice-weekly summer fireworks over Lake Michigan were spectacular and became a defining Chicago summer event. In its first year, Navy Pier drew approximately 7 million visitors. By the early 2000s, annual attendance had reached 9 million, making it one of the 5 most visited tourist attractions in the entire United States. By any quantitative measure, it was a success. So what happened to the enthusiasm? The renovation that was supposed to change everything. By the early 2000s, Navy Pier's leadership acknowledged publicly what visitors had been saying privately for years. The 1995 vision had aged poorly. The retail mix was stale. The entertainment anchors had shifted. The IMAX Theater closed in 2007. The Skyline Stage outdoor concert venue was removed, and the family of attractions that had felt fresh in 1995 now felt dated. The overall experience felt like a waterfront entertainment district preserved in approximately 1997, unchanged in a city whose food, culture, and public space had evolved enormously. In 2011, Navy Pier launched a comprehensive planning initiative called the Centennial Vision, developed in preparation for the Pier's 100th anniversary in 2016. The stated goals were genuinely ambitious: and specifically addressed the failure modes that had developed over 15 years. The planning process articulated a desire to attract Chicago residents to the pier, not merely tourists, to create year-round programming rather than relying on a June through September summer season, to develop programming and amenities that felt connected to Chicago's actual identity and culture, rather than generic American waterfront tourism, and to physically transform the pier with new architecture and public space. The Centennial Vision budget was approximately $115 million, a significant public investment in a publicly owned facility. The centerpiece of the physical changes was a new Ferris wheel, the 196-foot Centennial wheel, replacing the original 1995 version with a larger structure whose gondolas were enclosed and climate-controlled, extending the attraction into colder weather. A new restaurant and event pavilion at the pier's lakefront tip, the offshore rooftop and bar, later joined by additional food and beverage concepts, gave the eastern end of the pier a contemporary destination. The Crystal Garden Botanical Space was refurbished. The public promenade was expanded and improved with new shade structures, lighting, and amenities. The lakefront perimeter was redesigned to provide better access to the water's edge. Work was completed in 2016, and the Centennial Year celebration brought additional attention to the pier. The new Ferris wheel was a genuine improvement over its predecessor. Larger, more comfortable, operable in weather that would have shut down the original. The lakefront improvements were well received by design critics. The fireworks continued. Navy Pier Authority CEO Marilyn Gardner described the goal as creating a true civic gathering place, not just a tourist attraction, a phrase that captured the ambition and, in retrospect, also identified precisely the gap between what the renovation promised and what it delivered. The visitor numbers after the renovation remained consistent with pre-renovation levels. The Centennial Vision did not reverse the pier's critical reputation or meaningfully increase local engagement. What it produced was a more physically attractive version of the same essential experience. That was a genuine improvement. It was not the transformation the marketing materials had promised. The local problem. The most consistent and the most revealing criticism of Navy Pier among people who actually live in Chicago is simple. They don't go there. Ask a resident of Lincoln Park, Pilsen, Logan Square, Wicker Park, Hyde Park, Andersonville, or virtually any Chicago neighborhood to describe their relationship to Navy Pier, and the response is likely a combination of mild disdain and cheerful indifference. It's for tourists. There's nothing there that the city doesn't offer better somewhere else. I went once, or I went with out-of-town family. This is a familiar condition for heavily tourist-oriented destinations in major cities. Times Square is for out-of-towners. The Hollywood Walk of Fame is for people who have never been to Los Angeles. The Fisherman's Wharf problem was covered in another script in this series, but it cuts particularly at Navy Pier, which spent its $115 million renovation and its Centennial Vision marketing explicitly claiming the ambition to become a civic gathering place for Chicagoans, not just a tourist attraction. The claim was made clearly and repeatedly. The experience did not change enough to deliver on it. The reasons Chicago residents avoid Navy Pier are familiar and specific. The food is expensive and generally mediocre relative to what a city with one of the deepest and most varied restaurant cultures in the United States offers within a short distance of the pier's gates. The retail is gift shop generic. The summer crowds during peak periods are intense enough. Millions of visitors concentrated on a 3,000-foot pier. That simple movement through the space becomes an exercise in patience that most locals don't have interest in. The parking for those who drive is expensive. The combination of a tourist-calibrated atmosphere and tourist-calibrated prices produces an experience that feels like it is designed for someone from somewhere else. What Navy Pier has not managed to develop is the kind of authentic local identity that would bring Chicagoans back voluntarily and regularly. The pier has not become the equivalent of the 606 Trail, which transformed an elevated rail line into one of the most used linear parks in the city and draws consistent local traffic. It has not become the Green City Market at Lincoln Park, which Chicagoans choose specifically for its quality and its rootedness. It has not become the lakefront museums, the Art Institute, the Field Museum, the Shedd Aquarium, the Adler Planetarium, which Chicagoans are genuinely proud of and direct visitors toward with enthusiasm because they reflect something real about the city. In a 2019 survey of Chicago residents conducted before the pandemic, Navy Pier consistently ranked low among places Chicagoans described as representing the best of the city. It ranked high among places they described as where they'd send a visitor who needed to fill a few hours without a specific agenda. That is a precise and uncharitable description of a tourist trap, and it is not the civic gathering place the Centennial Vision described. The retail and food problem. Walk the pier on a summer Saturday afternoon, and the commercial offering presents itself clearly. Chain restaurants, a food court with familiar franchises at tourist destination price premiums, gift shops selling Chicago-branded merchandise that is generic enough to have been designed for any city with a recognizable skyline, a Bubba Gump shrimp company doing its reliable business in tourist districts from San Francisco to Baltimore, and the particular retail ecosystem that emerges when the primary customer is someone who is somewhere unfamiliar and wants to buy something that proves they were there. The food situation at Navy Pier deserves more than passing mention because Chicago is a genuinely serious food city. The James Beard Foundation, the institution that has defined American culinary excellence for decades, has awarded more Beard Awards and nominations to Chicago restaurants and chefs than almost any other city in the country outside New York. The city produced Alinea, one of the most discussed restaurants in the world. Chicago deep dish pizza is one of the few genuinely regional American culinary traditions that has developed its own passionate subculture. The Chicago hot dog, no ketchup ever. The subject of actual local identity is the kind of specific thing that reflects the city's relationship to its own food. Chicago is a place that takes eating seriously. A visitor to Navy Pier who eats only on the pier goes home with a version of Chicago's food culture that is both more expensive and significantly less accurate than what they would have found by walking 20 minutes in any direction from the pier's entrance. This is not a small thing in a city where food is one of the primary reasons people choose to visit. Some of the individual food and beverage options at the pier are defensible. The lakefront rooftop dining experience in the warmer months offers views that no other restaurant in the city can match. The offshore rooftop concept added after the renovation is a genuine improvement over what it replaced. But the overall food environment of the pier has never approached the quality available within a reasonable distance, and the pier's economics, the rents, the volume requirements, the need for operations that scale to millions of annual visitors across a compressed summer season consistently favor the same chains and formats that appear at tourist destinations everywhere in the country. As Chicago Tribune architecture critic Blair Kamin observed in a review of the pier's post-renovation state, the bones are extraordinary. The setting, the scale, the views, the flesh is the problem. What covers those bones is mostly the same thing you'd find at any major American tourist pier, and Chicago deserves better than that. That observation has not become less true with time. The winter problem. Chicago has a winter. This is not a surprise to anyone who has been to Chicago, read about Chicago, or stood on the lakefront in February and had their face inform them in very direct terms about conditions in the upper Midwest. It is a Great Lakes winter of the specific kind that produces wind chills of -30 degrees Fahrenheit on the lakefront, horizontal lake effect snow, and conditions that make extended outdoor time on an exposed pier extending 3,000 feet into Lake Michigan not just unpleasant, but genuinely hazardous for long portions of the year. The 1995 Navy Pier design was primarily a warm weather attraction at its commercial core. The Crystal Garden provided indoor botanical space year-round. The theaters operated on a year-round schedule, but the pier's most popular and most revenue-generating elements, the Ferris wheel, the fireworks, the outdoor promenade, the excursion boat cruises, the sidewalk dining, the waterside crowd movement that makes the pier feel alive, were compressed into the June through September window that Chicago's climate permits for comfortable outdoor lakefront activity. The Centennial Vision renovation specifically and explicitly identified year-round programming as one of its central goals. The new Centennial Wheel's climate-controlled gondolas were a direct engineering response to the winter problem. You could now ride the Ferris wheel in December without losing a finger. Heating elements were incorporated into the updated outdoor spaces. A winter fireworks program was established, adding New Year's Eve and holiday season events to the calendar. The Lightscape light installation was introduced as a cold-weather draw designed to attract visitors during the months when the outdoor experience was otherwise impossible. These were genuine improvements that attracted real visitors. The winter programming expanded the pier's relevance beyond summer in a way that the pre-2016 version hadn't managed. But the structural challenge remains. A destination built on an exposed Great Lakes pier in a city with one of the most reliably brutal winters in the continental United States will always be seasonal in a way that no amount of enclosed gondolas fully resolves. The winter visitor numbers at Navy Pier remain a fraction of summer numbers. The pier's economic model is deeply dependent on summer performance, which creates an operational vulnerability and a quality of experience degradation problem. The summer is so crowded that navigating the pier becomes effortful. The winter version is sparse enough to communicate that the place is waiting for summer to make it real again. A destination that is genuinely excellent in July, serviceable in September, and surviving in February is not a year-round civic anchor. It is a seasonal tourist attraction with some cold weather programming. The Centennial Vision's language about year-round civic engagement was more ambitious than the geography of Lake Michigan and the meteorology of the Chicago lakefront can accommodate. The convention anchor problem. A significant and underappreciated portion of Navy Pier's floor space and operational focus is dedicated to convention and corporate event facilities, specifically the Festival Hall complex, which occupies substantial indoor square footage along the pier and hosts conventions, trade shows, corporate gatherings, and exhibitions that generate consistent revenue and have essentially nothing to do with the experience of visiting Navy Pier as a tourist or resident. The convention business is financially important to how the pier sustains itself. The Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority governs both Navy Pier and McCormick Place, the large convention center approximately 3 miles to the south along the lakefront near Cermak Road, and uses the Pier's Festival Hall to host medium-sized conventions and corporate events that McCormick Place, at 2.6 million square feet, is too large for, and that hotel conference facilities are too small for. It is a genuine market segment, and it generates revenue that supports the Pier's broader operations. But a functioning commercial convention center and a public leisure destination are uses that create friction when they share the same space. When Festival Hall is running a major trade show or corporate conference, portions of the pier become restricted or operationally unavailable to casual visitors. The people moving through the pier's corridors in badge lanyards with conference-branded tote bags have a different relationship to the space than families visiting from Wisconsin or international tourists exploring the lakefront. The dual use creates an atmosphere that can shift, without warning to the casual visitor, from festive lakefront destination to convention center hallway. More fundamentally, the convention emphasis reinforces the pier's identity as a facility rather than a place. A facility is optimized for function. A place develops identity. Navy Pier functions very well as a convention facility with a dramatic lakefront setting. Whether it functions as a genuine place, with the accumulated meaning and specific character that make a location feel like somewhere, is the question that 30 years and $115 million of renovation have not fully answered. The Pier's primary customer in the convention context is not the Chicago resident looking for weekend recreation or the tourist seeking authentic Chicago experience. It is the conference organizer looking for a lakefront venue with 170,000 square feet of meeting space that is not McCormick Place. That is a useful customer. It is not the same as a civic gathering place. What works and what the critics miss. In fairness to Navy Pier, and because this script is observation rather than prosecution, there are genuine, substantial things that work at the pier and that tend to be dismissed or overlooked when critics reach for the easy tourist trap characterization. The Chicago Shakespeare Theater, which has operated at Navy Pier since 1999, is one of the finest regional theaters in the United States, under the long leadership of Barbara Gaines, who served as artistic director from the company's founding through 2023. The theater built a reputation for producing Shakespeare with consistent imagination and professional quality. The institution has received the Tony Award for Outstanding Regional Theater, which is not something a mediocre institution receives. It produces world-class work, and it happens to do so in a facility that most of the tourists walking past the theater entrance don't fully understand they're walking past. If Navy Pier were nothing else, being home to the Chicago Shakespeare Theater would be something worth noting. The Chicago Children's Museum, which has occupied a major space at the pier since 1995, is a genuine educational institution. It is not a gift shop with some interactive panels. It is a fully realized children's museum with permanent and traveling exhibitions designed with the same serious educational principles applied at the best children's museums in the country. It serves both local families and visiting families. It earns its presence. The fireworks over Lake Michigan, twice weekly on Wednesday evenings and Saturday evenings throughout the summer, as they have been essentially since 1995, are legitimately spectacular. The combination of the lake's reflective surface, the distance from the pier, and the backdrop of the Chicago skyline creates a fireworks experience that is specific and outstanding. It is not manufactured to seem extraordinary. It is actually extraordinary. Chicago's lakefront at night is one of the most beautiful urban views in the world, and the fireworks on that backdrop are worth making the trip for on their own. The architectural boat tours that depart from Navy Pier, operated by Chicago's First Lady Cruises and other operators, are among the definitive Chicago experiences. The 90-minute Chicago River Architecture Tour, which proceeds from the lakefront through the Chicago River and its branches, while guides explain the history, architecture, and urban development of the city's built environment, is cited by both locals and tourists as one of the best things to do in Chicago. The fact that it departs from Navy Pier is one of the genuinely excellent reasons to go to Navy Pier. The Chicago River Architecture Tour alone is worth the trip to the pier, and it happens to include one of the most dramatic urban river canyons in the world as its subject. The setting itself, which is not an amenity that can be removed or renovated, is incontestably extraordinary. 3,000 feet of pier extending into Lake Michigan, with the full panorama of the Chicago skyline visible to the west and open water in every other direction, is a view that the commercial mediocrity layered on top of it cannot fully erase. The bones, as the architecture critic noted, are extraordinary. The pier exists in a setting that most cities in the world would make extraordinary use of. The question is whether Chicago is making the most of it. Where Navy Pier stands today. Navy Pier in the mid-2020s is in a condition that resists simple characterization. Failure is wrong. Success is incomplete. The reality is more specific and more interesting than either. The quantitative picture is strong. Annual visitor counts of 8 to 9 million make it one of the 5 most visited attractions in the United States. The Chicago Shakespeare Theater and the Chicago Children's Museum continue to operate as world-class institutions. The summer fireworks draw crowds that fill the lakefront. The architectural boat tours are consistently sold out in high season. The Centennial Wheel operates year-round. The convention facilities generate consistent revenue. Pier 25 restaurants, the offshore rooftop, and various food concepts generate hospitality revenue. The pier is not collapsing. The qualitative picture is more complicated. Navy Pier has not become what the Centennial Vision described. Local engagement has not meaningfully increased. The retail and food environment remains generic relative to the city around it. The winter programming has expanded, but has not made the pier a year-round destination in any robust sense. The convention use creates institutional tension with the public recreation mission. The visitor who came in 2016 and the visitor who comes today has a more attractive physical environment to move through, but essentially the same commercial experience, calibrated for the same first-time tourist market. Post-pandemic, Chicago tourism broadly recovered, and Navy Pier's visitor numbers recovered with it. The pandemic damaged the pier in specific ways. The fireworks programs were suspended, the Children's Museum and Theater were closed, the convention business was decimated, but the fundamental structure of the attraction was intact. When conditions permitted reopening, the recovery was real. What is not recovered, because it was not lost in the pandemic, is the gap between Navy Pier's aspirations and its delivery. Navy Pier was trying to be a civic gathering place before the pandemic. It is still trying, the fireworks are still spectacular, the Shakespeare Theater is still extraordinary, The boat tours still represent some of the best time a visitor can spend in Chicago. The Ferris wheel still turns over Lake Michigan with the skyline behind it, and the view is still one of the great urban views in the world. And Chicagoans still, largely, don't go there voluntarily. That is the specific and persistent failure of a place that has most of the ingredients it needs and has not yet figured out what to do with them. Whether that changes depends on decisions about the Pier's commercial mix, its relationship to the neighborhoods around it, and its willingness to prioritize Chicago's identity over generic tourist destination economics. Decisions that have been deferred through at least 2 major renovation cycles and that remain available to make. The Pier's next chapter, if it has one, probably involves a more honest reckoning with what the space can and cannot be. A 3,000-foot pier extending into Lake Michigan in a city with brutal winters and a compressed tourist season is always going to be primarily a warm-weather, tourist-facing facility. Accepting that rather than marketing against it, and then investing in making that specific experience as distinctly Chicago as possible, the food, the retail, the programming, the artists and vendors given space, might produce something more honest and more satisfying than the civic gathering place language that the Centennial Vision never quite delivered. The bones are still extraordinary. They've been waiting for the right ambition for a long time. Navy Pier is not dead. The numbers don't support calling it a failure in any absolute sense. 9 million annual visitors is 9 million annual visitors. The fireworks are still lit twice a week over Lake Michigan. The Shakespeare Theater is still one of the best regional theaters in the country. The boat tours are still outstanding. The Ferris wheel still turns over one of the great urban waterfronts in the world. What Navy Pier has failed to become is specifically Chicago's. The views belong to Chicago. The history belongs to Chicago. The theater and the Children's Museum genuinely belong to Chicago. The commercial layer, the food, the retail, the conventions, the tourist calibration, belongs to a category of American waterfront experience that exists in the same form in Baltimore, Boston, and San Francisco, with the local skyline changed and the local themed merchandise swapped in. Tourists who come to Navy Pier generally leave having had a fine time. The fireworks were good. The Ferris wheel photo turned out well. The view from the pier at night was worth the trip. And then, on the next Chicago trip, they spend their time in the neighborhoods, at the lakefront museums, at the Riverwalk, at the food markets, in the places where Chicago is actually concentrated. Navy Pier gets one visit, the rest of Chicago gets the relationship. That is the precise and specific answer to the question of why tourists aren't coming back to Navy Pier. Not because it was bad, but because it was interchangeable. And Chicago gave them better options once they knew where to look. That is a problem that more renovation money alone cannot fix. It is a problem of identity. And identity is built differently than piers. Hit that like button and subscribe if this one was worth your time. More content like this coming.